This is episode 1123.
Yeah, I mean, I think the move from Groupon to Tempus, for me, it was less about kind of industry specific. It was more a realization that I really enjoy kind of the early stage building periods for a company. And so, had been at Groupon. Groupon had been around and had matured. And so an opportunity came along to kind of join Tempus as the first finance hire, that it felt like I could get back into something that I really enjoyed doing. Obviously, that does not come with no risk. They were kind of pre-revenue when I joined Tempus, but I was super excited about what they were attempting to build. I mean, obviously we're focused on oncology. Everyone, unfortunately has friends or family members that are impacted by cancer, and so being able to use my talents in finance to kind of advance a business that hopefully would impact patient care was really the main driver for me.
The path to the CFO office for Jim Rogers began with some accounting rigor at Ernst Young and evolved into strategic leadership roles at Groupon, where he moved from the technical accounting into FP&A leadership. That experience later connected him to Tempus. Think AI-enabled personal medicine, founded by entrepreneur Eric Lefkowski, who also co-founded Groupon, by the way. Joining as the company's first finance hire, Rogers would build Tempus's finance function, guide it through rapid growth, and help take the company public. Our talk with CFO Jim Rogers begins after this. Hello, Jim Rogers is with us. He's CFO of Tempus AI. Today he leads finance, treasury, FP&A, and investor relations with deep financial acumen rooted in roles from his days at Ernst Young and Groupon, and he studied technical accounting along the way. And again, today he's championing precision medicine through AI-driven strategy. Jim, welcome.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate having me.
So, Jim, if you wouldn't mind, I always allow the finance leader to take it from the bottom. And as you look back, if you wouldn't mind identifying those experiences you feel prepared you as you went along, what would you share with us?
Yeah, I don't think that there's one, experience that I felt, prepared me for kind of taking a CFO role. It's really the culmination of the experiences that I've had across my entire career. As you mentioned, I started my career at Ernst Young in audit, was there for a couple years before moving over to Groupon, prior to their IPO, stayed there for 6 or 7 years in a variety of different accounting and finance roles. So technical accounting, SEC reporting, controllership, and then kind of moved over to financial planning and analysis. And so when I joined Tempus, 7 or 8 years ago, I was the first finance hire. So it was a new type of role and really just leaned on the various experiences that I had to kind of build an infrastructure to set us up for success.
Well, for those early finance career builders, I was interested in discovering you got a master's in accounting. Is that right? And can you tell us about who you were back in time? And one of the things I also want to point out is after Ernst Young, and you get your master's somewhere in the early first decade of your career, I believe. You can correct me. But you enter Groupon. When you do, you have like this technical accounting specialization. So it seems like you got the door open, perhaps, with your accounting expertise. And if I'm overstating that, correct me. But reflect a little on why a master's in accounting and how did it help you during your early career?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate work at Notre Dame and then got a master's in accountancy right afterwards at Northern Illinois University. There was actually a requirement to kind of get your CPA. You needed 150 credit hours. And so many people kind of pursued this master's after their undergraduate. And so kind of before starting at EY, I went and did this master's to make sure that I was able to meet that requirement.
Technical accounting is really your lane for a number of years. Is that right? Would you look at it that way?
So, I think accounting was certainly my background. After a couple of years at Ernst Young, I was always kind of, gravitating to some of the technical accounting kind of aspects of that role. And so was just fortunate at the time that Groupon was, just taking off. They were starting to build out an accounting team. to support their eventual kind of IPO. And fortunately for me, they were looking for people on that technical accounting team, which lined up with my background.
And again, what I think is interesting is you come through the door as a technical accountant and you leave as head of FP&A for North America. So there's this evolution over years, 6.5 years you're there. And I'm wondering, sometimes what we hear from folks with the accounting specialization, they have to demonstrate and kind of knock on the door hard to get over to the FP&A, to get those opportunities that they're going to be able to demonstrate that they can think strategically and play an FP&A role for the company. Was that your experience, or tell us a little bit about what that path within Groupon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the accounting background is really essential for anybody who's in FP&A. Is you really need to understand how the numbers work, how everything interacts, and that was really kind of what led to my transition out of the accounting team and into the financial planning. Was I had a deep understanding of the drivers of the business, and had been doing it for many years. And so, when the role opened up at the FP&A team, it was kind of a natural transition. I think, that there's always kind of this question, accounting and FP&A, the work is actually very similar. And that's why I think you see kind of people bounce back and forth, a lot.
But we also see a lot of people parachute into FP&A roles from Wall Street with no accounting expertise. That's what I'm pushing back on.
Yeah.
I'm saying, hey, that FP&A, group is kind of it's a mixed bag at times.
Yeah, no, it definitely can be. And the accounting roles aren't, you don't need an accounting background to necessarily do that. I think people from Wall Street certainly have enough accounting understanding to kind of move into those roles as well. I think depending on the organization, though, it's really important for people to have a full appreciation for kind of how the P&L and balance sheet work. And so, again, I was fortunate enough that, to make that transition after spending time on the accounting side.
There was, at some point in time, you had to demonstrate that you could think strategically as well as do the necessary accounting treatments, or shoot up flares when you thought there was going to be an accounting challenge. Do you recall, on your FP&A watch, and it seems like you advanced into a fairly senior FP&A role at Groupon. What would you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I think even in the accounting role, obviously accounting and finance work hand in hand. So I had a ton of exposure to kind of financial, leadership within Groupon. And I think, a willingness to speak up and to talk about things when you have that exposure kind of gives you that opportunity to prove that you can do it, right? And so, even in my accounting role, I was not only being relied on from an accounting standpoint, but also answering, questions that may typically go to FP&A. Kind of building those relationships with the leaders in that group allowed me to eventually make that transition.
So I'm wondering if there's a specific FP&A challenge you can share with us. What was the type of challenge that you would confront?
Yeah, so I think a good example of something that, popped up was I was on the accounting team, on the technical accounting team. Groupon was kind of moving out of its local daily deals and moving into kind of a Groupon goods business that they were going to launch in Europe. I raised my hand to participate in kind of leading that effort from a financial standpoint, initially on the accounting side, but because we were kind of building things from scratch, certainly had an overlay with the FP&A team. And so I think, raising my hand, taking that opportunity to say that I was interested in kind of doing something different, afforded me that opportunity to eventually prove that I could do it and, eventually move over to the FP&A team.
Had you raised your hand regularly in the past, or was that sort of a breakthrough moment for you where you saw a sizable opportunity and you really wanted to let your more senior folks know, I can help you here?
I'd say that was probably the first time. I was still relatively early on in my career. And so I think at that point I had felt comfortable in the position that I was looking for something new to kind of keep things interesting. And so that was probably the first time that I did so.
Well, I want to point out again, you make a 6.5-year investment at Groupon before moving over to Tempus. Now, this is quite an industry segue here. You're moving into from one industry to another. No hesitation there. And can you tell us a little bit about your decision making? Why this was the appropriate opportunity for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the move from Groupon to Tempus, for me, it was less about kind of industry specific. It was more a realization that I really enjoy kind of the early stage building periods for a company. And so, had been at Groupon Groupon had been around and had matured, and so an opportunity came along to kind of join Tempus as the first finance hire. That it felt like I could get back into something that I really enjoyed doing. Obviously, that does not come with no risk. They were kind of pre-revenue when I joined Tempus, but I was super excited about what they were attempting to build. I mean, obviously we're focused on oncology. Everyone, unfortunately has, friends or family members that are impacted by cancer. And so being able to use my talents in finance to kind of advance a business that, hopefully would impact patient care was really the main driver for me. And so that plus the fact that I was building something from scratch really presented a unique opportunity that I was, excited about.
Well, we're going to talk some more about Tempus in a short while. I just want to, again, share to the listeners, you come in sort of as a senior director of finance, as you said, sort of the first hire in the finance realm there. And over the next, you come in 2017. By 2021, you're stepping into the CFO office. So a 4-year climb to the CFO office, not bad. Lots of experience, undoubtedly, that 4 years. But can you tell us something about, was there a recruiter? What was this your network? Again, you're jumping from Groupon into, the medical realm. It's not every day that we see that.
Yeah, so the founder and CEO of Tempus was also one of the founders of Groupon, and so there was kind of a lot of overlap of the network, and so was introduced to our CEO, who I vaguely knew from my time at Groupon, but sat down with him and kind of understood what they were trying to build, and it just felt like something that I really wanted to be a part of.
I briefly looked at the company history when I was doing a little preparation for our talk. Is that the founder whose wife had a personal experience?
Correct.
And why don't you share that with the audience? I think that's interesting because now that makes sense. I get it now.
Yep.
Screens are important.
Eric Lefkowski's our founder and CEO. His wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer. He was kind of perplexed at the lack of data-driven decision-making in her care. And so set out to create a company to kind of take in a bunch of different data elements for a given patient to hopefully help route their doctor to getting them on the most appropriate therapy. So that was kind of the genesis of the company. And since then, we've kind of made a number of different strides in different areas, which we can get into. But so that was kind of the early days was kind of the initial thoughts of what that could be. And that's what ultimately got me excited and got me over there.
And Eric said, I need a finance guy. And lo and behold, Jim Rogers was an up and comer over at Groupon. How's that? Is that good for an abbreviated story, or would you?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure he tapped into his network of folks and asked, who would be a good fit for this role. And we met, and the rest is history.
Well, we'll have a few more career-related questions for you. Thank you for letting me probe a little more for you. I think that's a really important part of it, though. That's exactly how these things happen. And I want to find out more about Tempus AI now. Tell us about Tempus AI. We think we know something, and you already shared part of the history. But tell us more. What is this company up to?
Yeah, so Tempus AI is a healthcare technology company that's really focused on bringing the power of data and AI to healthcare. We started in oncology, and so we have a couple of different product lines. We run a very large next generation sequencing lab where we sequence samples of oncology patients to identify mutations that may be actionable in their care. What differentiates us from a traditional diagnostic company is at the same time that we kind of run these wet lab procedures, we build integrations into the hospitals' EHRs or data warehouses to pull out other data elements for those patients to kind of, again, contextualize the diagnostic result for the physician to hopefully put them on the right therapy at the right time. Alongside the large kind of doctor and patient-facing business, we work with biopharma companies through licensing of de-identified multimodal records to help advance their drug discovery efforts. And then ultimately, we're attempting to kind of mine all of the data to bring additional insights through our applications business, which is really the development of algorithms that can match patients to clinical trials, close care gaps, or even become diagnostics of their own. So we're incredibly patient-focused. both by impacting patients today through our diagnostics business, impacting patients in the future by development of better drugs, and through kind of the applications business, which can hopefully help get, patients on the right therapies.
So, I see the company went public last year. Congratulations, milestone in 2024. But when you arrive in 2017, what's the capital structure? Clearly privately owned. Are there some fundraising already underway?
Yeah, so we kind of did our first fundraising shortly after I joined. We were VC backed for a number of years. Ultimately, when we reached kind of some scale, we started having some kind of crossover investors. Ultimately culminating in the IPO last June.
So, you had taken company public, before. Tell us something a little bit about that, because that's quite a milestone. We see finance leaders who have been, might have 3 CFO chapters behind them and they haven't taken a company public, and they're waiting. They're chomping at the bit. You got to do it within, 4 years of entering, or 5 years of entering, Tempus here. Tell us something about that.
Yeah, it really was a great experience. I was part of the IPO at Groupon, albeit a much smaller part, as part of the technical accounting team. So I was familiar with the process, and it actually at Ernst Young and participated some on the audit side. But it really was it's a long process. We originally were planning on going public in 2021 was when we filed our first S1. Obviously, market conditions put a little wrinkle in that. And so, it's a very, long process, obviously something that you have to make sure that the organization is ready for. And we invested a lot of time and effort in making sure that the company was in a position to do so. And we were fortunate that our business model, allowed us to kind of grow through difficult market conditions and still, successfully complete the IPO in 2024.
And you, along the way, you had to build an IR function. Can you share with us how you tackled that? Did you go buy a book, How to Build Your IR Function?
So
I know it's not that easy. How'd you do this?
Yeah, so we originally we kind of outsourced the function initially. We obviously had met with a number of investors through the various private rounds that we had done over the years. And so, I think we had a pretty good base to start from. We ended up bringing it in-house at the end of 2021 and kind of building out both the team and the infrastructure to kind of manage that. But there's not like a silver bullet. You have to obviously hire the right folks, put in the time and effort to build the relationships, and that's exactly what we did.
Tell us something, and I find it very interesting, because I think in some ways this is a little new for you, building those relationships with the analyst community. Certainly Groupon had them, but you weren't necessarily on the front lines there as you were here. Establishing those relationships, taking those phone calls at the end of the day when you thought you could call it a day, you get another analyst calling you. Tell us something about the time you had to dedicate to that type of communication.
And in some ways, we were fortunate in that the timing of the IPO was delayed, because it actually gave most people aren't interacting with the analysts for that amount of time before you go public. So we were fortunate that the delay, which is out of our control, allowed us to kind of cultivate those relationships, make sure that people understood the business. Since we are a little bit different we don't really fit in one box. We kind of span a couple different industries. And so we just had to take the time to make sure people understood, the different components of the business, why we were investing where we were, and all of those things.
Tell us, again, we talk about this company, Tempus AI, and clearly it's become a much more about this climate, the AI climate, let's call it. What's changed over, let's say from 2021 till now? I mean, the story has become much more AI centric. Why?
AI and data have always been core to what we did. We are the beneficiaries of the fact that there's a lot more technology in AI that has come out that we're just the beneficiaries of. We obviously didn't create all of it, but we can leverage a lot of it in the things and products that we build for our customers. And so it really permeates the entire organization, both the products that we offer customers, how people interact with our diagnostic tests, how they interact with our data from a life sciences perspective. but then also internal, efforts as well. Is how do you leverage these technologies to make your workforce more efficient? And it's something that we, encourage our team to do every single day.
I wrote down the personalization of diagnostics, and this is something that's going on across the oncology sector, let's say. Can you share with us how its advances are perhaps worthy of note while compared to others?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different sequencers out there that are all great companies and are great at the diagnostics that they provide. We just took a slightly different approach in incorporating other data elements because we felt like, the genetic mutations are very important, obviously, in deciding which therapy is important. But there are other factors that must be at play because not everyone responds to a drug that targets a specific biomarker. And so, our goal was to start amassing data sets that allow us to identify these types of insights to, again, provide them back to doctors to positively impact patient care. And so that's what we've been focused on. We announced actually just recently a partnership with AstraZeneca and Pathos, whereby we're building the first foundation model within oncology of this size based on our entire database. And so you can imagine the types of insights that you may be able to find by developing, training these models on our very, structured data sets, we think could be incredibly powerful for advancing precision medicine.
Tell us something about the metrics or numbers that you're paying close attention to, so you understand that the company's performing the way you want it to.
Yeah, so depending on the product line, the metrics are obviously a little bit different. Within genomics, it's kind of what are the volume of tests and orders that you're receiving, and then what is your average reimbursement, because we're billing insurance for the diagnostics that we run. So there, it's we're very much similar to other diagnostic providers. That those are the two big metrics that we look at. For the data business, it's a little bit different because that's more akin to a technology company. So there, we're looking at kind of total remaining contract value and kind of net revenue retention. So kind of what are your bookings doing in terms of your backlog of contracts that you're signing? And then also on a year over year basis, how much did your customers from last year purchase in the current year? Because that's, again, indicative of additional adoption within those organizations.
We want to talk about AI a little bit with you, and we know Tempus has or is scaling a number of its AI tools across oncology, cardiology, and neurology is what I have written down here. How do you manage the validation of those tools? The investments.
Yeah, so it's very much we obviously invest a ton of money into these various efforts. We've always taken the approach, though, that the resources are allocated to where we have proven out the business model. So the majority of our investments are occurring in oncology because that's where the majority of our revenues are today. For these smaller kind of offerings, we try to keep them siloed from impacting the broader business until we kind of have a proof of concept that we think can scale. And so we've done this from day one. We like to be involved because we think that the platform that we built is applicable across a lot of different disease areas, but we want to make sure that they're not disrupting what is core to us, which has been oncology. But for us, we think that it wouldn't be prudent for us to just focus on one disease area because the platform itself can be helpful in a lot of different areas.
Can you explain? And again, I was speaking sort of very broadly about AI tools, but to stay in the sort of the broad way of thinking here, we'd like to know how AI is really having the greatest impact inside this space that Tempus has. Where is AI having the greatest impact here?
Yeah, so I think there's obviously external-facing technologies and internal-facing technologies. From an external-facing technology, we have a portal called Hub, which physicians can access. We also have a researcher-facing tool called Lens that our biopharma partners leverage, and embedding kind of AI in those that allows them to either talk to the diagnostic They could ask, what does that mutation mean? Link me out to the relevant guidelines. What are the side effects on the FDA label? How do you make it the product more useful for physicians or researchers? Similarly, within Lens, you can, as opposed to kind of filtering the database yourself, you can tell the tool what cohort of patients you want to build, and it will automatically build those. So that's an external facing, AI tool that has been, extremely powerful both for physicians and for researchers. But then internally, we're sitting on a massive amount of data, hundreds of petabytes of data, and leveraging, large language models to sift through that data to identify patients that you want to dig into further. You couldn't manually do that. Would take a ton of time. And that's where there's internal tools that we've been able to leverage that make our workforce incredibly more efficient. And so those are the things that we're most excited about. But as I mentioned before, it really permeates the entire, organization. Even within finance, we can leverage these tools to kind of track data in real time, surface insights, things that just you couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, we'd like to see if you can share a little more there. I mean, where is AI having the greatest impact when it comes to, let's say, automating finance today? Where do you think AI is having the greatest impact at Tempus AI?
Yeah, I mean, since we're billing insurance, there's obviously a volume of information that gets kind of passed along in appeal letters and those types of things. So leveraging AI to sift through all of those different claims, what we're hearing back from insurers, is incredibly important and has allowed our workforce to scale, very, very quickly.
Are there new skills or roles emerging? And maybe they're in finance or maybe they're adjacent to finance when it comes to supporting AI and some of these AI initiatives. Has the organization, has it bred new roles or responsibilities? What would you tell us?
So I wouldn't say that it's resulted in new roles. I think a lot of it is a reallocation of resources. And so, our technology team has spent a lot of time building an infrastructure that allows the entire organization to kind of build agents to make their work more efficient. And so once we kind of built that infrastructure, we really leaned on each of the different departments to be responsible for building the agents that they thought were most necessary. So as an organization, we track who's accessed these agents, who's built them, and encourage people to continue to do so, because we think that really will allow us to scale, much more efficiently than if those technologies aren't embraced.
From a finance organization perspective, again, you grew up with this finance function now. Tell us, you prioritized at different times who was the next hire. What have you learned along the way? I mean, does this finance organization resemble others with companies in this weight class?
Yeah, I mean, I think the finance organization has evolved over time. When I first joined, was we need to implement a bookkeeping system. We kind of have to build the basic infrastructure. That has evolved. I always tell our team, we're not here to report the news. We're here to influence the news. And so, what was reporting the news 7 or 8 years ago, now our finance teams are embedded with the organization. They're involved in decision making. They're kind of viewed as the single source of truth when it comes to financial information and analysis. And so they really kind of sit alongside their business partners. But early days, obviously, that's not the case because that infrastructure doesn't exist. And the business is still kind of figuring out, how it's going to kind of scale and what the business model actually is. But to your point, yes, we didn't think about IR when I first joined, but once we embarked on kind of the IPO process, IR jumped to the forefront. But now, we view it very much as being embedded with the organization and making sure that we're involved in all decision making.
Any just in retrospect, I mean, having gone public, and I think it's more than a year now, you can correct me, being a publicly held company, what would you have done differently?
I don't think that we would do anything differently. I mean, I think there's probably always things around the edges, but for us, it's been focused on execution of the business model, and making sure that the finance organization can support all of the various things that we have going on. We're a little bit of a unique company in terms of the different product lines and offerings. And so it's finance's role to be flexible as we launch new initiatives, to make sure we're able to support them. We have the data they need to influence kind of decision making. But I don't sit here and look back and say, oh, I would have changed this one thing or that. I think that by and large, we're happy with where we're at.
Okay, Jim, we're up to our finance strategic moment question, and I might edit myself here because I'm going to ask you for a specific story if you've got one for us, not a generalization. What would be your finance strategic moment?
Yeah, I was, fortunate to go through two companies growing from relatively small to very large organizations. And at Groupon, which grew incredibly quick, and we did a lot of things right there, was operating in a lot of different countries very early on in its life cycle. We've taken a different approach at Tempus and have been very focused on thoughtfully expanding, really doubling down in areas where we're having success. And not, overly focused on growth in the short term. We're really focused on a business that can be a sustainable grower for quite some time. And so whether that's international expansion, moving into other disease areas, we're very thoughtful about making sure that those don't disrupt our day-to-day operations. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time thinking about, making sure we're making investments to sustain growth long term, but not having those be, distractions in the short term.
We're going to jump to our mentoring round where we're going to ask you to look back again. We're curious about your first 90 days in the role and something that surprised you. And we're going back to 2021, so we're in the time machine. But, you had worked closely. You had observed finance people up close, finance leaders up close, but you finally had the role and you stepped into it. And if you could go back in time, what is it that you'd tell yourself? What is it that you wish you knew?
I think the first 90, I had been fortunate that I've been around the organization. So there's nothing kind of within the organization that, surprised me. I'd say in terms of the role itself is that, every day is different. And I think, in various roles, you kind of have your lane, you kind of do that. But in this role, there's something that comes up, every day. But that's what I actually find most enjoyable about the role is, and no 2 days are alike. You have to be solution, oriented, and really focused on kind of solving the organization's problems. And so, looking back, there's not something that I think somebody could have given me, something that would have solved all of our challenges. But it's just the willingness to be flexible and to really focus on solutions versus getting caught up in some of the noise.
Jim, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side. We're wondering if there's something, and you've been there a while, so you would think your colleagues know most everything about you, but is there something your colleagues might not know about you, a personal interest that you had, some personal pursuit from your past?
I don't think that there's anything that they'd probably be surprised that I'm more of an introvert than would probably lend it. They'd believe in the office, but I do like to reflect and calm down outside of work, but they typically don't see that in the office.
What about a book or a resource? Would you have? Is there something you turn to or something you'd recommend?
I don't have a book. What I would encourage everyone is really just networking, right? And understanding, keeping in touch with people that you worked with, previously. I think when I took over the role as CFO, I leaned on a lot of the folks that I had worked for previously that might be CFOs at other organizations. All CFOs are dealing with similar issues. And so, people shouldn't feel like they need to reinvent the wheel when, there's probably a number of people within your network that can help you, navigate certain issues or introduce you to people that may be able to help. So I think that has been the best resource for me is really leveraging the network, asking people kind of what they're dealing with and quickly realizing again that everyone's kind of dealing with the same issues.
We end with asking you for your priorities as a CFO for the coming 12 months. What would those be?
Really, two. One is just continued execution. We want to make sure that the teams are focused on executing, and so that's what we spend all of our day thinking about. And then two is really getting back to the kind of the AI discussion of how do we leverage these technologies to make our workforces more efficient, but then also to kind of put infrastructure in place to track things, flag things when they go off track, all of those things can be automated these days. And so that's what our teams are focused on.
Jim Rogers, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.